Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Northeast Scene Podcast. This is Keith.
And Tommy.
How's everybody doing? Now, we've been taking a vacation away from the Northeast, but now we're back to talk to the master of the four strings and New York City legend, Brad Truax.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm blushing. A master? Wow, that seems like it's not cool to say anymore, master or something.
Oh yeah, no, it's like they got rid of it when you list homes in certain areas. They will no longer. They'll say primary bedroom.
Right.
Primary of the four strings and New York City legend,
right?
Brad Truax.
Oh man.
So Brad, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks.
I'm going to start with an easy question. How are you doing today?
Today I'm doing all right. Yeah, I mean, time's so psychedelic right now. Everything's so blurry. So it's like, I can't really tell, what happened 2 hours ago or 2 days ago anymore,
Yeah.
But to get current, I just came back from getting another antibody test, and this definitely kind of fits in. This test fits in because, there's talk of, playing music with people.
Oh,
wow.
And I mean, at least dipping our feet back in the water, going to the jam space. And, because we got to be safe, it was like, well, where's everyone stand on their testing updates?
So did you get the results of your test?
No, I just did it today. I mean,
Okay.
I got one like a month ago and I'm negative on everything, but today is just so that we can all convene on Friday before we make an appointment to jam and say, who's positive, who's negative, and whatever. I guess it's like the new reality we're supposed to do now,
Yeah, a lot of precautions to take. And it's strange. I was sitting on my couch earlier today and I saw like my winter scarves just sitting on a chair next to me, and I was like, the fuck happened? Like, like it was winter, everything was normal, and then all of a sudden it's July.
Yeah.
And I've been indoors like a majority of that time. It's very, very strange.
So in fact, I mean, so these group of guys that will potentially play with this weekend possibly was like a new project, and we're kind of unnamed. But the last thing we did before quarantine is like we played a show at Union Pool. Okay. So that was like March 11th. And for a lot of people, not that a lot of people attended that show, but it was, a nice crowd, but that was sort of like the last event that everyone had went to in that particular little scene,
Yeah.
And that was the last time like I'd played with people, music with people, and live for that matter too. And then, so the guy that I went to go get the test with is the guitarist for that band. He, we were like, oh, March 11th, that seems like 3 fucking years ago. Or, you know what I mean? Like, it was only like a few months ago, but it like, like the beginning of this thing seems such a long time ago at this point.
It really does, and so much has changed. So how has your life been affected? I mean, you're in music, you are in the scene. So what did you have going on that had to be canceled, and what changed for you?
So I mean, the primary band that I play with is Interpol, right? I mean, Keith, I think you know that or whatever.
Yes.
And we had literally, fortunately, we had wrapped up like almost 2 years of touring, like 2018 and 19, so that wasn't like affected. We were done, we were off. And then this year, speaking of this band that played Union Pool, like it was like I was starting a bunch of new creative projects, this unnamed band included, and another, just a bunch of new projects. But one of the projects that I was going to be doing was, and we had tours scheduled in
Mm-hmm.
April. I'm supposed to be on tour right now, I think in like LA or San Francisco tonight. um,
Oh.
was with Steve Malcolmus from Pavement.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And Steve Malcolmus and the Jicks, and he put together this new band for this record that had just come out in the beginning of this year.
Was that traditional techniques?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So he put together the traditional techniques band, which was like very exciting. I mean, exciting for me because like I love him. I love his music and,
Right.
and friends. And then another friend from New York, this gentleman, Matt Sweeney, who's kind of a legendary guitarist, has played from everyone from like Johnny Cash to Current 93, or, you know what I mean? Like just an amazing guy. And then like, this other, like two other guys from Portland. But it was like super fun band. Super psyched to be doing it. But yeah, that got like, I think the first tour obviously wasn't going to happen in April,
Right.
so yeah, and then so everything I had this year was just flushed down the toilet.
Yeah. So do you have any other do you do music primarily, or do you have other jobs you work, like when you're not touring and playing?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so the whole live music thing obviously deeply affects me for like playing with bands in
Mm-hmm.
some form or another. But there are like, pretty much, I mean, for a very long time now, particularly like the last like 16 years, it's like I'm either playing in band or I'm like, and there was a while where I was like tour managing and like, kind of road crew stuff. And then, even the last several years, I started working at a music venue in between when I wasn't, like very randomly when I wasn't on tour.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Which venue?
like the Brooklyn Steel or Terminal 5.
Ah, okay.
Like, so those kind of places, and it was just like a very like, once or twice a week in between tour kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It really depended whenever I was available and they needed somebody. But so like everything I do for a living revolves
Yeah.
around live music. You know what I mean?
Oh
Uh,
man, yeah.
um, and it's just like, yeah, it's heartbreaking because it was almost like I just remember, like at the beginning of this thing in March, it's just like, I knew a lot of bands on tour who tours just started disintegrating while they were on the road.
Yes.
So at least in our world, it was the first thing I could see that was like, oh shit, like what's going on? Like it seemed like music and bars and venues were like the first thing to go,
Right.
like live events. And then just the very sad, unfortunate thing is like it'll be the last thing to return. I mean, the live music, entertainment, sports, anything that will be the very last thing to return. It is basically based on like, we're talking like vaccine.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, so anyone that has and you just see it as, I mean, it's like almost like, and I think all of us were in denial just because it was so obviously unprecedented, like this is, I mean, I've like been touring for decades and like, I've toured through like political upheavals and disastrous weather situations and just, you know what I mean? And like
Mm-hmm.
nothing has ever stopped people going out there and playing live, you know,
Yeah,
like
I
nothing.
continued on as normal when this thing was first starting. I didn't understand it at all, and I've never experienced anything like it. So I was just pressing on like normal. And then when they announced the bar and restaurant closings and everything in New York City, then I was like, oh, that's when it kind of became real for me. And I
Yeah.
was like, I better take some more precautions here.
Yeah.
So, Brad, now there's a lot we know about each other, but
Mm.
there's also a lot we don't. So I was really looking forward to this conversation. So I'm going to take us way back. Now, tell us about where you grew up.
So, I was born in Gainesville, Florida.
Hmm.
And then I basically, like formative years going to school, um, moved to basically Central Florida, like Tampa, St. Petersburg. So Tampa, St. Petersburg is it's called like the Bay Area, where it's like Tampa would be San Francisco and St. Petersburg would be like Oakland, you know? It's like a bridge that separates the two. So I kind of grew up on the St. Petersburg side and eventually moved to the big city of Tampa. But yeah, like, and it's really easy to shit talk Florida, and I have my whole life, because I mean, and now that I've actually like traveled a lot around the world in the United States and have been to every state, it really is the most fucked up state in the United States. It really is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I definitely have proof now, like, that it is. It's just such a wild, but also now that I'm older, I'm like fond of like how fucked up it is. Not in a political way, don't get me wrong, or currently what we're dealing with, and but just as like wow, like I can't believe I escaped,
Yeah, I mean, you always see the memes like Florida man, or like whenever something crazy happens, it's just always
very
Florida.
True. That is very true. I mean, it's very true. That's what makes it so psychedelic,
It's charming in that sense.
Yeah, there's like a Florida noir, like
Florida noir. I love that. That's like a Bloodline on Netflix.
Right.
They're the trailblazers of Florida noir.
Yeah. And the Florida man, and just I don't know.
So you're growing up in the Tampa area. What is your intro to music? Have you always been a music fan, and like what was like the scene that you broke into it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, so I guess we're talking like sort of 80s-ish, like middle school, high school, like late 80s. And like, and that's the thing. It's like, God, I don't want to turn this into like a shit talking Florida situation, but sort of like where we grew up. I mean, it was like a real cultural void. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like there wasn't like a big city. There wasn't like a scene.
No art museums to visit or anything.
Well, here's the ironic thing with that, specifically art museum, is that and this is actually goes along to like sort of my formative like really discovering music, and like sort of the music I was attracted to, I guess, like growing up sort of in that MTV like first phase of MTV generation, is like you had like stuff like Duran Duran or David Bowie, sort of like the English art rock thing, like almost like teeny bopper music at the time or whatever. Which then like led down these sort of rabbit holes, because you would like obsessively like read a magazine article and they would mention like Brian Eno or punk rock or Roxy Music or, what I mean? Like the Clash or something. So you just follow those threads. And like, I was sort of gravitating more towards like, I don't know, just like, I guess it was like sort of new wave goth punk rock, like art, I guess we would call it, like, and there wasn't like genres really defined at this time. I think like the closest thing you would call that music at the time was like progressive or alternative or like the import section, or whatever. Like,
I remember that.
But like new wave punk rock, and then like goth, but like it all sort of like was this very like artful music, like alien sort of artful music. But just going back to the art museum thing, it's like in the cultural void of living in a place where we grew up in a small town, was that I was in the library at high school one time, and I was like flipping through these art books, and I came across this like pretty psychedelic painting, like, and it turned out it was like Salvador Dali, this like hallucinogenic Terrador thing, right? And it was like one of those things of like, my mind was already going down this sort of rabbit hole of being different and feeling alien and connecting with sort of these like artful things, and like, kind of seeing for the first time in my school library this, which is now, that movement was known as surrealism, right? And I was just like, kind of really cracked open. And then, as it turns out, months later, I live in St. Petersburg, Florida, where there is a fucking Salvador Dali museum.
And I feel so.
Oh.
This is what I was gonna. So this is what I was gonna bring up. So this is such an aside, but so my father was friends with, grew up with Lee Ving from Sphere, and we chat on the phone fairly often, and we were talking the other night, and we started talking about art, and he goes, "You ever checked out that Dali museum?" I'm like, "No, I've never been to Spain." He goes, "It's in fucking St. Petersburg, man."
Yeah.
It's like, wait, what?
Yeah. I mean, which honestly is very fucking surreal. I mean, can I curse on here? I'm sorry. I don't know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
No, for sure.
Okay. Which is just a surreal thing because like St. Petersburg is like where your grandparents are from. You know what I mean? Like it's like so sleepy and so sunny, you know? And like, you know, like there really was like this culture void, but like right there, you know, 20 minutes from where I live is the fucking Salvador Dali Museum, which had that very piece that I discovered in that book in the library in high school, you know?
Wow.
Like hanging, like larger than life, you know?
Yeah.
So whatever. I mean, you know, I was very reliant on the like there was this community radio station in Tampa that broadcasted out of Tampa, and of course at night they would have like the alternative based music programming, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know, and I, you know, obviously I would record on my cassette the whole, you know, radio show, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like so eclectic and diverse where you would hear like, you know, like The Fall or like the Replacements back to back. And then like, you know, like the sort of English post-punk stuff like PIL and all of these things. And like REM, you know, like REM were just like this small indie band from like Athens, Georgia, you know?
Yeah.
So, but like, or like the Minutemen and just all of these, or Dinosaur Jr. and just like sort of all these real like eclectic, and everyone sounded so different from one another, but it was all sort of lumped into this sort of like left of center, you know, radio shows that you can like hopefully fully tune into, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's really what, like, that's really kind of, and then, you know, of course we all like, you know, sort of like middle school was like, you know, the Ramones, the Clash, and like Devo was always from as early as I can remember, like Devo was such like a huge, they were like, they always, that's the thing that really sort of like inspired me the most from like, you know, cause it was like being a kid growing up in this sort of like classic rock world where it was like Kiss and Styx and Pink Floyd, you know, and then Devo comes along and I feel like they really sort of speak to like the youth, like the adolescents, because they were so like playful, you know. But then once you sort of like discover all this, the roots of punk rock and all this stuff, you kind of go back to them and be like, whoa, they were so punk, you know. I mean, they were like quirky, you know, quirky as fuck, but they were also, yeah, they were just a huge sort of like I want to hang out with these guys, you know, like I want to play with these guys.
I always gravitated towards, I grew up skateboarding, and I always remember if anybody had Devo stickers or Devo t-shirts, I was always like, I got to hang out with this dude. They're always like into something weird, or they're going to turn you on to something cool that you've never heard of. And it's so funny now. It's like, I have 3 young kids, and we watch a lot of movies and cartoons and stuff like that. And there's a fair amount of things that I see like, oh, what's the you know, who composed this? And it's like, it's Mark Mothersbaugh. And I'm like, right. That's the fucking dude from Devo. Jesus.
Right. Yeah. Exactly, man. And then it was just like, of course, like any small town. And I mean, I'm sorry, I'm old, so it was like I have to go back to like, you know, there was no internet, you know, there's no social media, like, you know, it's like basically you had to rely on like going to school and seeing somebody wearing like a t-shirt or like a sticker on their back of their on their notebook or something, you know.
We're reading a thanks list. Yeah, we grew up pre-internet too until we were about like, I don't know, 15, 14, somewhere around there.
Like right. We had like AOL online. I remember like sophomore or junior year of high school, like 97, 98.
Right.
That's when we started getting it like fairly often.
So yeah, it was just sort of like seeking out like the, you know, the like-minded person in school, you know. And it's just funny because just as far as like, you know, I think like, I mean, maybe you guys can identify, but it was like you found that person and you started a band even before you even picked up an instrument. You know what I mean? Like you're like, we're in a band, you know?
Yeah,
And
in eighth grade, I had a band, but we never practiced or like played or did anything. But we had a band and we had a name,
yep.
and that was it.
Yeah. Oh no, we
Yeah.
had the band names, we had the album titles, we had the song titles, but we never
Yeah.
picked up a goddamn. Maybe we didn't even own an instrument. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And then like after you talk about it for months in the band, and you've like drew the album covers, and then eventually like on the weekend your friend would come over and like we'd have like some shitty acoustic guitar and like a string, like a 1-string bass or something,
Yeah.
and then you start writing, you start writing the songs on the record or whatever.
So what was the very first band you ever did? Like one that actually played a show?
Oh man. I know, I feel like I should remember this, but like it's it's like dusting off some photo album. It was with my friend Julian Costner, and we started this band called Miss America. And I think he was like an anomaly because he had moved from New York City to St. Petersburg, Florida, and ended up in my high school.
Who does that?
Well, that's the people who are escaping New York City, like I mean that's the thing. Florida's filled with people who are just like, we got to get the fuck out of here and go into hiding, Florida, or whatever.
Florida and Alaska.
Yeah, totally. So I guess his parents did, but like he was like as cultured as one could be, Like he was like turning us on to all sorts of crazy stuff, like in the New York thing that we had just like more of the avant-garde stuff. Like, he's like, you ever heard this guy John Zorn or, or like, Sun Ra or whatever, just crazy stuff. But he actually was the guy the first one of us that got a 4-track cassette player. And he would just like, that was like a real revelation. But he recorded a bunch of, like weird songs, and we learned them and played live, I think in his front yard or something. I think we just put on our own show. We were too young to like go to a venue or something.
When you were young, like the person who had the 4-track yielded a lot of power.
Oh, dude, he was a creative genius, man. It was like him is like basically the equivalent of like your buddy who owns like a massive studio now.
Exactly.
It's like, this guy has a 4-track. Oh my god.
So was Home the first like pretty significant band you were in, and they ended up taking you to New York City too, right?
Yeah. So Home would basically that started sort of right after I graduated high school, and then that was like full on like the Monkees, like we all just like lived together, like lived in a roach infested house in Tampa, Florida, like moved to the city, and started playing shows. So like so Home was like the first like fuck, we're doing this, we're recording, we're making records, we're playing shows, I think we were like one of the first first, I don't even know what you call it, but it was like definitely like the 90s, and like there was labels had money to throw around, and like it was like kind of post like Nevermind, and even like speaking of like Pavement, it was like everyone wanted like some sort of band to fill the roster, so there was like but we were kind of like the first like, I guess you would call like indie rock band out of our area to get get a record deal, on the heels of that stuff, just people were looking for like the indie band in the small town,
Yeah. So around what year was that?
So that was 91. I graduated high school, and I think we had a record deal in like 94.
Okay. So that must have been a big deal, because I've never been in a band that's actually been signed, but to be that young and to be in a band that's doing things and to have like a record deal, it must, I mean, that was like my dream. That must have felt pretty great at the time.
Well, yeah, except we were total fuck ups. I mean, like,
how so?
Well, we were just like, I mean, the thing that really bonded us outside of like the music was, we smoked a lot of weed.
Yeah,
like we were just stoned and young and like drinking, and like we all kind of had our own different thing. Like I was really hanging on to sort of like the punk DIY indie sort of ethics, because also during that time there was like a bunch of like bands starting their own labels and putting out 7-inches and their own records, and so I was very much like, that's the world that I want to be a part of,
Yeah.
And like, and like so we sort of grappled with like we got to take money from this label, and um but I also think we were like young, where we just didn't really take it seriously. You know what I mean? Like we just didn't really like, we were just like, this could all end tomorrow. Or, I think also because of we were a band, and like we loved each other, but before, it's almost like you kind of hear these stories where like, bands almost break up before they get their first record deal,
Yeah.
like we were definitely like at that point of like, we were just too fucked up. Some of us had mental issues, some of us had drug issues, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so we were about to collapse, and then that thing got offered to us. But like, to our credit, we did. I mean, and then granted, at the time, it wasn't a lot of money, you know what I mean? And it was this label called Relativity Records,
Mm-hmm.
and they were like a offshoot of like Sony Records or something, like some major label offshoot. And I think their biggest sort of like thing at the time was like Steve Vai or Yngwie Malmsteen or something like that,
Yeah.
But they had, some A&R guy who worked for like CMJ, who was like looking for like the next Pavement or, Sebadoh or fucking, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
And then like, I mean, up in that point, we were fully like, we'd always had recorded ourselves, like whether it was like 2-track, 4-track, like we were very like DIY, and just sort of did everything ourselves, and like, put out our own 7-inches and all, sort of following that trajectory, just because like, we didn't have any money, and and it was actually fun. Like we just had such a good time like recording ourselves, and like, because I think we'd had gone into like a professional recording studio once, and it just sounded like crap, like it sounded so flat, and like the guy, whoever we paid to do it, he's just the jabroni that worked there, like he didn't understand like where we were coming from, or because we weren't like I mean, that's the thing, like coming out of like the Tampa, I guess, scene, if you will, and I mean, I hope you guys know that like Tampa's like where death metal comes from, like that's like,
I didn't want to bring that up.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Okay, so like I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but when I was younger, when I was like 16, I was like, dude, I'm fucking moving to Florida and I'm starting a band, and I'm gonna fucking be like Atheist or fucking Death. Like I have to go there. Like Obituaries from there,
Deicide.
Morbid Angels from Deicide, fucking Cynic, all that shit. Like I was, especially Death and Cynic, I was so obsessed with it, because when I heard things like Cannibal Corpse, I'm like, okay, that's straightforward and brutal, I get it.
Yeah.
When I heard Cynic and Atheist and fucking, especially Death, when I heard like a couple, I remember hearing records going, this is unlike anything I've ever heard. And not only is it unlike anything I've ever heard, their musicianship is just fucking out of this world. They're just great guitar. Chuck Schuldiner is one of those people I still listen to stuff and I go, that's a fucking great riff. I don't care if you fucking wrote that in 1989 or 2020. Like, that's fucking so, it just, there's something magical about it. And that I like, it's the reverse of what you wanted. You're like, I gotta get out of here, and I'm like, I gotta fucking go there.
Yeah.
It's sunny all the time and hot. It's fucking like, we lived through blizzards up here.
That's interesting. I didn't realize all those bands were from that area. I knew Death was from Florida, but so it makes sense that a big metalcore scene broke out as well.
There's another band called Nocturnus that I went off on them for a while, but Atheist, Nocturnus, Massacre was from Florida, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like a ton of those bands, dude. I was just so hyped on it.
Yeah. So I mean, so there was all those bands from there, but then like, because of this one recording studio in Tampa called Morrisound, and there was this guy, Scott. Oh, I'm forgetting his name. Anyway, there was bands from all, like death metal bands from all over the world, like Sweden, that would come all the way to Tampa, Florida, just to record at this studio where all the death metal bands would record at, But so like there was, and I have like so there was that kind of thing going on, which we weren't affiliated with for obvious reasons, like, like we just were like, like dorky indie wimps, but like the scene that we would have, like the scene that like, before we got signed or whatever, that like mostly the shows that we were doing in Florida and around Florida, and that's sort of going back to that thing of like how I grew up on music, with like sort of all these bands that were under the umbrella of like, say, punk or indie or new wave, like, like you take SST Records, for example, like Run by Black Flag, like the hardcore band of all time, and then like, but all the bands that they had signed SST, like, the Minutemen or Meat Puppets or Sonic Youth or Dinosaur Jr. or Saccharine Trust, they all sounded so unique, completely just different from one another, and in Florida, there wasn't like a scene of like, I mean, outside of death metal, or like hair metal or whatever, where like these bands definitely all sounded similar and looked similar. Like sort of outside of that, like the bands that we would play with, like every band sort of had this thing that they did that was unique, that set them apart from everywhere else. So like in the early days of us doing shows, we would be playing with sort of like these punk bands that were just like, and they would, it wasn't metal at all. It was like they're, you guys ever heard the band Ass Suck?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Dude.
So like, they were like a grindcore band, and they were one of the best, if you ask me, ever.
Steve Heritage.
Yeah, Steve.
They're like the grindcore band.
Yeah,
they're fucking so good.
Yeah. And then like one of our drummer for Home, he dated Paul, the singer's sister, And so I think we played a show with them, and there was this other band that was sort of the opposite of Assa called Scrog, and they were just like this very like slowcore, like Swan sludge thing, and then like, yeah, it was just like all these sort of really eclectic, different sounding bands, but because we were like the only bands in towns, we would always end up playing shows together,
Right.
And it's funny because we had like really like nothing musically in common, except like I remember talking to one of the guys in Assuck, and like, the only band that we both like were obsessed with that we could find common ground was like the Cocteau Twins, which was, I still like love that band to this day. Anyway,
I think that happens a lot with burgeoning scenes. Like with ours, there was a lot of crossover emo bands, hardcore bands, metalcore bands, random ska bands. Like everyone played together because we all lived together. Yeah. And we knew the same promoters, and they'd all get thrown on the show together.
Yeah. So I mean, so that was cool that we, were able to like, even though we didn't sound or like look like any of these people, we all got to like play shows together, except for the death metal band. The funny death metal story that I have is that like I really loved that stuff, I just like on a technical level, and how like dark it was. And that's the thing, like, Florida, Sunshine State, like sort of like where the fountain of youth supposedly is, and people go to retire. Like it really produces some of the darkest fucking bands ever, like to the extreme, and death metal being one of them. But like, but I remember, so like all of us would practice at this like basically these storage units in like the hot Florida sun, like no air conditioner or whatever, and everyone have to like leave their doors open, so all the bands practiced. It didn't matter what kind of band, but like all the death metal bands practiced where we practice. And I'm always kicking myself to this day, because like the thing with the death metal bands is the drummers would show up hours early to warm up,
Oh yeah.
So
wait, a drummer showed up early?
I know, right?
This is unprecedented.
They literally, because of how technical that stuff is, they had to like warm up. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Like they had to like at least be warmed up. And so at any given point in the day or night when you walk through the storage unit, you could hear literally, 10 to 15 death metal drummers playing solo, echoing off. And I just thought it was like the best. I like really so kicking myself for never recording it, because I would have released a record of it like, years ago. That's or whatever. Amazing. But it was such like a phenomenal sound of like, 15 death metal drummers playing solo by themselves at the same time.
Wow. I love that. So how does Home end up making the decision to relocate to New York City. That's a big move from Tampa.
Yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, I mean, essentially it was like a geographic. I mean, like, I mean, at that point we'd been touring a lot. We'd been putting out records, and like it always sort of like, New York kind of became this like second home for us because like the labels were there and that we were on, and like just a lot of our friends, and like it just and I mean, but the geographical part was that it was the exact opposite of Florida. Like Florida, I mean, at that time, particularly in the 90s, was just sort of like a dead end. You know what I mean? Like it just sort of just really felt like that. I mean, and, just like drug problems and people dying, and just like felt very bleak, and like just it was like a geographic of just like we got to get the hell out of here.
Right.
And so I was the first one to move up here. Then the other two members followed.
And what year was it when you moved up there?
Like 96, I think. Yeah, I was like, 96, yeah.
So I always romanticize older New York, as many do. So, I mean, was it just a complete trip back in the day? Because I didn't get here till like 2012. So I feel like I always missed out on the best, AKA the most irresponsible days in New York City.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I feel like kind of mid 90s was almost like the beginning of the end for what of like,
because that's the whole Giuliani and cracking down on all the clubs and everything.
So I mean, so when you moved here, like it's sort of known that you don't go past Avenue B, like, or enter at your own risk,
Yeah. Which is funny because I live part of the time on Avenue C now.
Yeah. I mean, unless you were specifically looking for trouble, or like score drugs or something, or
I was often doing both of those. So I always say, like, I'm glad I didn't get to New York earlier because I probably might be dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And but like, I mean, the first job I got in New York and like worked at forever was on St. Mark's at Kim's Video, and like, and so that kind of like St. Mark's scene was still happening with like the rockers and the junkies and the punk rockers, and you know what I mean, like sort of, and then you had Coney Island High across the street, you had the Continental around the corner, then CBGB's, and then Brownies and Avenue A. Like there was just like all these, music venues like every night that had 10 bands playing,
Yeah.
So it was totally fucking exciting, and then obviously just the city that never sleeps, right?
Oh yeah.
Just always some action. So so it's still, it still had its grit, but it was also like, the beginning of the end. So I'm glad I caught the tail end of what I could of that sort of,
I think a lot of the grit is still there. It's just hidden. Because when I walk around the East Village a lot and Lower East Side, and you still see it. And even like around Times Square and stuff. Like I was going to meet my friend at Port Authority before, and just randomly, like guys are like trying to pull me aside to sell me drugs and all this. And I'm like, wow, this still goes on? It's kind of awesome.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's there. I mean, I always get a kick out of like every now and then going through Tompkins Square, because it's like, it's like, even though it's an expensive neighborhood, there's still like the crusties and the junkies and the rats, and like, like there still is like people holding on,
Absolutely.
And I love it. I totally love it. But I mean, like, but you can take St. Mark's, that block between 3rd Avenue and 2nd Avenue, and it's like I wish I just had like a time lapse of like from the period of when I moved there to like what it is now. You know what I mean? Because it was just like, I mean, even going back to like the 60s, like it was just like sort of like cutting edge block, of like artists, musicians, junkies, poets, whatever, and then like the punk rock, CBGB's era thing, and Suicide, and, just all of the, Jim Spa, like all of these things. And then, you go down it today and like what, it's like yogurt and like, sushi and, you know what I mean? Like I don't know. It's like that whole thing has been erased.
So you're in New York City with home. It sounds like you're pretty well acclimated because you have friends there and labels. And
Yeah.
are you touring nationally at this point?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're working at Kim's.
Working at
that was like
Kim's.
that was like a video / record
Yeah,
store?
I worked in the record department. It was like known for the videos, but then they, it was like kind of like it's like where like the other music people, owners all worked at Kim's, then they left Kim's and opened other music. And it's that, and it's funny because like Kim's was almost like the McDonald's for like, New York art, music, movie people, like everyone got a job at Kim's eventually, or got fired from there, stole from there, quit from, whatever.
So when does home come to an end?
Home actually never came to an end. I mean, that's the funny thing. We never broke up, and in fact, like, because we're like lifelong friends, and we just never called it a day. And like, we get together every few years and record something and release a record. And I think we just released one earlier this year that we had recorded 2 years ago. So we never broke up, but we just became a inactive, non-functioning band, where now we're just like friends doing it for fun, because we like
Do you
love
ever
each
play
other.
out still?
No, we barely played a show. I think the last time we played a show was like right after David Bowie died. And that was like a tribute, and that sort of gave us the idea to like record all this music. And it's very like guerrilla style, friend vibe, but we never stopped,
Right.
which is kind of amazing. Like, because that would make us like, we've been a band since 91, so however old we are, almost like 30 years old or something. It's crazy.
Wow.
But we just became inactive, and I think a lot of people moved away, people moved out of New York, people got married, people had kids, and I was the only fuck up who was just going to play music.
Yeah, I'm always curious about people's experience, because for me, all I wanted so bad was to be in a band. Like, I thought it would be the answer to all my problems, and everyone I knew was in a band, and it's just what I wanted to do, and I struggled so hard to even get into one. And for some people, a lot of people I talk to, like, it's just what they do, and they're like, they don't really think about it. They're like, yeah, I just play in bands, that's it. So was that kind of how it was for you, or did you ever think like, oh, I'm gonna try to like go to college or anything like that?
No, I mean, to be honest with you, I never had a plan B, like, and I think it's funny because it's like, I think to some, I don't know, maybe this is controversial, but I think some degree, like creative types, people who are in bands and sort of dedicate their life to it, are on some version of the spectrum, because it's an insane thing to do, you know what I mean? Because it's like, you are kind of like throwing your life away to a degree, you know what I mean? Of like really dedicating myself. I'm going to bypass the education, the family, you know what I mean? Like whatever resemblance of a normal life to just sort of like chase this idea that like really you have like a 1% chance of being successful at.
No, I agree with you, because we know all musicians and everyone is special in their own way. And myself too. Like, I didn't, and I always think like, oh, I never did it, or I didn't try it, but I did, because I worked crappy jobs. I didn't go to college. I've been in a number of bands. I've tried a number of things, and I was doing it. I had sacrifices. I lived with like 3-4 people at a time. I mean, that's this kind of stuff you got to do to get by if you're pursuing the arts. So you're a young man living in New York City. You're playing in home. What are some of the other bands you got involved with? Now, I was looking today. You have quite a resume, Brad. So what else did you get involved with, like, after moving there?
So sort of when home started becoming really inactive, I randomly ended up, me and my friend Greg, who I'd played with in home, and he had been in some Austin, Texas bands called like Windsor for the Derby, and these, he moved back up to New York, and he opened up this amazing record store off 9th Street between A and B called Shrine Records, which was like such a community center of fuck ups, you know. But him and I ended up playing in this band, backing this woman, Holly Golightly. And Holly Golightly comes from, you guys familiar with like Billy Childish and the Headcoats and the Headcoatees? It's like very English DIY punk sort of blues, you know.
I'm not
okay
familiar.
I'm not, but
worth
but
investigating.
continue.
Worth investigating. They put out millions of records, like millions, you know, like shittily recorded, but just like very powerful. Like the Headcoats were like such an amazing band to watch live, just like raw power, English punk, political with like a, you know, whatever. Long story short, Holly Golightly is this woman that comes out of like the female version of the Headcoats, which are called the Headcoatees. And she's looking for this band to like tour New York, a rhythm section. So me and my buddy Greg joined this band and do a couple tours with her, but she brings her English guitar player over, this gentleman named Dan Melchior. And we hit it off, and he wants to come over and start a band with me and the drummer Greg with his other friend Bruno from England. So they move over here and we start this band called the Broke Review. And I mean, just to give you context, it was like, so I think it would around the time where like New York City was sort of like, you know, like in the Strokes period, I guess, whatever, the fucking meet me in the bathroom period,
Right.
you know, whatever.
Right.
A little pre that, but also like that's what was sort of going on in New York, you know. And then there was like this other sort of version of it, which were these like, you know, kind of like garage rock, I guess you would call it garage rock. So because Dan kind of came out of this like Headcoatee scene, we were sort of automatically lumped into this like garage rock, you know, scene. You know, like all these like indie labels like In the Red or Sympathy for the Record Industry, like which very much catered to that world. And then sort of like coincidentally around that time, like a band that came out of that scene, by the way, is the White Stripes. Okay. So there was this sort of like fucking 5th generation garage rock movement, you know, which sort of like came, or raw rock, I guess that they were calling it at the time, you know, which basically came out of like the whole Strokes meet me in the bathroom, New York City thing, you know, where just like, you know, like the Enemy and people in the United States were really psyched by this, like, you know, these new rock bands, but you know, but to me they were just garage rock bands, you know.
I think that's still like a big thing here, because I moved here in 2012, and I got involved a little bit in the scene in Brooklyn, and it's a lot of that like garage rock. I don't know, everyone really likes like just alternative stuff like Nirvana or Dinosaur Jr. I found it annoying personally, because I'm a hardcore kid. I like hardcore, metalcore, post-hardcore, emo, everything under that umbrella. And I could just never find anybody who listened to anything that I do. It was all this weird garage rock stuff. And all of my friends really worshipped Brian Jonestown Massacre, like to the point that it was just really irritating. Like, I still won't listen to them to this day because they wouldn't shut up about Brian Jonestown Massacre. So, like, I don't know. It just wasn't my scene.
Oh yeah, it sucked. Like I still, I mean, that's some West Coast stuff I never understood. I never got it. But yeah, so this band was sort of like lumped into the ghetto of that world, you know. So like, you know, when we had a record deal with In the Red Records, which actually is a great label still to this day. That, you know, they put out a lot of like weird punk and garage and like psych stuff, and just a really cool like LA label, you know, and like a lot of, you know, like sort of like, I don't know, we were sort of caught between this like New York world of like, you know, there was like the John Spencer Blues Explosion type stuff, you know, and then this like sort of like post Strokes like new garage rock bands. And like we all hated it because like once, you know, and I think we would end up opening for the White Stripes right before they got big. They did like a show at the Bowery, and we opened for them because there was this like the White Stripes were sort of connected to this like English Headcoatees world, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got asked to open for them. But I remember like right after that gig at the Bowery Ballroom we did with them, they fucking rocketed into the fourth dimension. You know what I mean? Like they were like the next way, you know, the next big Nirvana or whatever, you know, the fuck. I mean, they went like straight successful after that, which was sort of like unprecedented because they were just this like two-piece garage rock band, you know,
Yeah.
on like
Yeah.
a very small indie label from California. And like, but then, so like, so the Broke Review would go on all these tours, and like, it was so disheartening because it was like, of course, it was like the White Stripes became this sort of fad where now every fucking Tom, Dick, and Harry in the United States wanted to be like a blues two-piece band, you know, under the guise of like a shitty garage rock band, you know? So like everywhere we went in every city, you know, we do these long, grueling tours sandwiched between these type of bands, you know? And I mean, it was really awful, you know what I mean? And like, so like we were on this like grueling, like suicidal 6-week tour. It was just so self-destructive. We weren't making any money, and like we were just in this like garage rock ghetto, you know, and just grinding on this like brutal tour, you know, and like I was strung out and the other guy was an alcoholic. You know what I mean? It was just like really just all of us sort of having these mental breakdowns and like, you know.
Yeah.
And just really disheartened by like all the scenes we were coming across, you know, or whatever. But like we remember we showed up at in Cleveland at the Beachland Ballroom, or like the front venue. I think it's the Beachland. But like, you know, we show up and like nobody's there, and like this opening band's there, and of course they're this like two-piece blues garage rock band, you know, and just like, oh my god. So they play, there's nobody there, and to me at the time, just because I was so over it, you know what I mean, like so over everything that was going on musically in the music world and the scene that we were in, it was just like the worst sounding band in the world. I was like, this is like a joke. This is like the whitest blues ever, you know, like whatever, you know, like I just thought it just like burned in my brain how awful this band sounded to me at the time. And it's like really like bottom of the, you know, we hit this like creative bottom, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this band was like nailing the coffin, you know, of like, let's get out of this world. So anyway, that was like the Black Keys' second show ever. Which later,
I love that.
like later, you know what I mean, like never saw that coming, you know what I mean, like never saw that coming, you know, whatever.
You just never know. Bands always surprise you. Like Nirvana was like a Melvin's ripoff band that nobody really paid too much attention to, and now they're like the new Beatles for a generation of kids.
100%. You
just never know.
And
what's
I'm
gonna
always
happen.
wrong, you know what I mean? And like the thing that always, like this goes way back before even all this stuff, like the band that I just, you know, the band that I would held sacred of like never crossing over into the mainstream just because of the name alone, but then they actually did have a hit, you know, and they were just such an extreme band of like total fuck ups, and made the most damaged music ever for the time period. But, you know, I would have never guessed they would have crossed over in the mainstream. The Butthole Surfers, you know, like the Butthole, like who would have thought in a million years, you know what I mean, that they would have like a hit on like MTV, you know, like it blows my mind. Anyway.
So did you cross paths with a lot of the classic alternative bands in your time in New York City?
I mean, I guess it depends. I mean, like, yeah. I mean, to a degree. I mean, it was, you know, moving to New York was like, you know, it's like that I've arrived moment, because it's like there's just so many I mean, still even to this day, I mean, I'm not so invested in it, but like, particularly when you first move here, it's like every night you can just go see the best music ever. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like of any kind of genre, really, you know? But, you know, there was still these like exciting venues that held like, you know, sort of going back to that thing, which I love about any sort of scene or whatever. It's like not a style of music or kind of music. It's just sort of this like real eclectic billing, you know, where you would
Yeah.
have a free jazz guy playing with like the Damaged Art Rock thing with a hardcore band and like a singer-songwriter, you know? Like there
Yeah.
was just so much more of that, you know, and now it's, I think in general, everything is sort of like, you know, looped by genres. Like we got to have like a goth night, or we got to have like experimental night, or we got to have the hardcore night, you know?
Yeah, I really miss the nightlife here. When I moved here, I took full advantage of it, and I went to all these venues in Brooklyn. I don't remember the names of half of them, but like just shows every night. But I didn't really care about the music. I was just more into the party scene because, you know, I was like going to these weird rock shows, and I was a hardcore kid at heart. But I just,
Yeah.
you know, like you're at a party, and the next thing you know, you're at a warehouse watching this band, and then you're on a rooftop somewhere. It's just like it's like a whirlwind of awesomeness.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, you know, sort of like the DJ culture, well, you know, it's like if you go see a DJ, and I'm not talking like at a dance club, but like, you know, just going to like a venue or a bar, seeing a DJ, and like, you know, sort of this goes back to like 70s New York and like 80s stuff. But like, you know, the whole point of DJ was to like turn you on to music. So this idea
Yes.
of being a DJ was like you would have these eclectic records, you know? And
Yes.
then so it was normal for people to be like, who's this? Who's that? You know? And nothing sounded like one another. And I guess what I'm just trying to tie it into as far as like any kind of like scene, like it was like going to a venue, like where just these real eclectic, different sounding bands would play, you know, and like it didn't matter where you from or what style you were in, you know, and like
Yeah.
you'd just be really turned on to so much more stuff that way, you know. It was very
Yeah.
exciting. I'm not sounding like it was like the golden days. It's just like things in general culturally have become more condensed. I mean, even like the streaming platform is like, what genres do you like, you know, and we'll cater to
Yeah.
that, you know, as
Yeah,
opposed
it's
to,
just broken down to genres and plays, and people can see what I'm playing, and statistics. It's all
yeah,
like,
like the
yeah,
algorithm world, you know,
yeah.
of like we're going to cater to your taste as opposed to like trusting you're an open-minded person, you know. Anyway,
It's just crazy, like being in New York for the first time, and everything just seems so overwhelming. And then when you after you live here for a while, you're like, yeah, I just know where everything is. But for me personally, the magic still exists. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I'll be walking down the street in Manhattan, and I'll be like, I live here? Like this is crazy.
yeah, I mean, I like that you say that, you know, because I'm reminded every so often, you know, that there's
Yeah.
this crazy magic, and like, you know, just going back to like that whole garage rock ghetto scene that was so devastatingly savage and brutal, you know, it's like spiritually bankrupt, I guess, you know, um, like out of that really did sort of, I became more involved with like, you know, like the sort of like Brooklyn DIY. It's like when, you know, Manhattan became, you know, sort of co-opted, and like all these sort of DIY venues started, shows and venues started happening in Brooklyn, like Williamsburg. You know what I mean? Like when it was
Yes.
still kind of like a no man's land. And
Yeah.
so, you know, that was like a real rejuvenating time because like, you know, it was like that sort of like guerrilla mentality DIY of like, you know, you don't need to play Brownies or Mercury Lounge or Bowery Ballroom or whatever the fuck and like try to like work your way up this ladder. It's like you can just ask this guy who owns this bar if he would mind, you know, putting on a show and like
Yeah.
whatever. And you know, and and then once again it was just like it didn't matter what kind of like band you, or no, not you know, I guess more eclectic the better of the lineup, you know. um
Right.
but like that's when that sort of stuff started happening, and like my friends were like the people, like, you know, like that, I don't know if you know that venue Warsaw in, okay,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so like Warsaw, my like one of my best friends still to this day is this guy Fitz, and he was sort of responsible for like just being this dude who would go walk into like a place and be like, hey, I want to put on a show here, you know.
Hmm.
um and so like Warsaw was this like Polish hall, you know, and he
Yeah.
had just walked in there to get a beer one day and saw that they had this like stage and like kind of ballroomish thing, you know,
Hmm.
and like just asked the guy if he can put on a show, you know, and then like guy said yes. And like, I don't think there was even like, he was just like, I'll, you know, people who come to the show will drink at your bar, you know, that's like your cut, you know? And then I'm not making any money because I'm just going to pay the bands or whatever, you know? So that place, like he kind of discovered that place. And like one of the very first shows he did there, I think was like, you know, it was like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs like second show ever, and like the Liars, you know, but like before they were, you know what I mean, like it was all their sort of early shows, and like these weird or Oneida, who's sort of this like Brooklyn experimental institutional band that's still around, still puts out records, or like, you know, this really extreme band called Sightings, who are still one of my favorite Brooklyn bands to this day, even though they don't exist anymore. But they were just extreme, like harsh noise rock, you know. But it was like, you know, it was like very like this like DIY, you know, and I would go around with Fitz and like the people who they now own Secret Project Robot, which has moved several locations, but before it was this sort of collective called Mighty Robot, and they like we'd walk around Williamsburg and just find these empty lots, you know, and then call the person who had the empty lot, ask if we can put like an outdoor show, and like go in there and like clear out the garbage, build a stage, and like, you know, put these like shows on in these like empty lots, you know.
Nice.
You know, like that sort of real guerrilla DIY, you know, kind of like not like fuck Manhattan, but also just like, you know,
you got to go where it's possible.
Yeah, you know, but sort of bringing the like art extremity back into music, as opposed to these like, you know, bands who are trying to like get a record deal and off the heels of like the whole meet me in the bathroom thing or whatever the fuck, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
did you have any exposure to that whole scene?
I mean, you know, ironic
or any involvement, I guess I should say.
Ironically, I mean, I only laugh at that now because I am in this band Interpol, which is like a huge part of that thing, you know? I mean, and I would just say, I haven't read the book, you know, but it's sort of weird with these, like, particularly any kind of book about like New York City music scene, of like these like golden era of the scene, you know?
Yeah, because I've read excerpts from that book, and I'm like, that was just kind of my life every weekend. I mean, it's not that. In fact, it's kind of tame compared to what I was up to. So.
But I don't know if I just resent the fact that like people. I wouldn't say the people who write these books. You know, it's not even that, but it's like there's an illusion that before this scene happened, there was nothing going on in New York. You know?
Yeah.
Which is like, dude, it's New York. There's always shit going on every fucking night of the week, man. You know what I mean? Like,
that's what's great about here is like, no matter how great you think you are, what you're doing, like, no one really gives a fuck.
Yeah.
And like, someone else thinks they're doing something like much, much better.
Yeah. You know what I mean? So
it keeps you level.
Yeah. So they're like, and it's sort of like what I was talking about. Like, it was just, there was this real eclecticism, energy, you know. There wasn't so much like a scene. I mean, of course you always, and like you had your like experimental people, your jazz people, your like noise people, your, you know, punk, but like, I don't know, it wasn't like, you know, all of a sudden the Strokes pop up and there's this scene, man, you know, like of successful bands, you know.
So you're playing in the Interpol, right? You've been playing with them for the past decade or so.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so how did you get involved with those dudes?
Well, I mean, that's sort of the funny thing. So like, and this kind of goes back to Home, is that one of the labels Home was on was this label Jet Set Records. They were like a New York indie label, and like Home was on there. You know that band Mugwai? It was like their first.
Oh God, one of my absolute favorites.
So it was like their, you know, first U.S. home label.
Nice.
But one of the sales rep that worked at Jet Set was this guy, Daniel. And he was like a real kind of like young intern kid who worked at the label, a real go-getter too, you know, like real, like, I don't know. Yeah. He just, you know, probably worked for nothing, but like really kind of like worked hard on the bands that were on that label. He worked for the label, you know, and he was always neatly dressed, FYI. But like he would sort of like come into the record store where I was working at and be like, hey man, you should come kind of, self-promoting as young people in bands do, like, come please see my band at Brownies, we're trying to get as many people there as possible,
Yeah.
And then finally I did, and it was like, it was Interpol, basically,
Yeah.
which I didn't think much of at the time, just only in the sense of like, oh yeah, there's that kid Daniel's band, like, okay, like whatever, And then, of course, probably like naively, like everyone else was like, yeah, I guess it sounds like Joy Division. I don't know. You know what I mean? Or whatever. Like...
Yeah. See, I honestly, I've never really listened to Joy Division. Like, I've heard the hits and stuff, and I'm not a Joy Division guy.
Right.
So I just never really made that connection.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people have said it, but
yeah. Well, I mean, the sad thing is, it's like they I mean, maybe Daniel had heard Joy Division, but like, he was more inspired by like DC Fugazi era, you know what I mean, like that. That's where he kind of grew up and came out of, and that was the stuff that really sort of inspired him to start a band, and the singer Paul never heard Joy Division, so I felt they've spent their whole career running, trying to get rid of that tag, which is just so funny because like now playing with them, it's like every show we've done around the world, there's always like the dudes up front with the Joy Division t-shirt, and we just sort of have this joke like, oh, they get us, oh, they they know where we're coming from, man,
Everyone has that shirt though. Yeah. I think they sell it in packs of 5 at Urban Outfitters, as undershirts.
Yeah. Going back to like 2010, and I guess I hadn't. That's how I know Daniel, And once again, I never saw that coming. You know what I mean? I guess like from the early shows, I just never thought like. Oh, I will say though, and this is a kind of a crossover. This kind of ties thing, and I'm sorry if I'm like rambling.
No, that's what this whole podcast is. Yeah, that's all we do.
So that, the Broke Review band that I was in, that was, really trudging in that like garage rock ghetto, in early in Interpol's, like kind of right before they got signed. All right. Well, two things happened. Was that like Daniel and I always kept in touch, and Daniel was always interested in whatever I was doing. And like he had gotten the Broke Review to open for Interpol. Maybe the first time they played the Bowery Ballroom, and it was like their first EP, I think, and they had sort of like worked their way up the whole, that sort of like structure I was talking about, where you play Brownies, you play Mercury Lounge, and you play the next venue up. There was this like thing, the New York bands had to do in order to play the bigger venues. You had to work your way up, which is, I'm rambling here, which was like sort of why I always really appreciated the sort of DIY sort of like Brooklyn thing, because there was just none of that shit, none of like, you don't work your way up, you just play a fucking show, and cooler the better. Anyway, so Daniel had asked the Broke Review to open for them, and we did the Bowery Ballroom. And it's funny because the only thing I remember about that gig is that I had asked Carlos, their bass player, if I could borrow his bass amp, which he had just bought in his first bass amp, and it was like this small like cube Ampeg, like very small, almost like practice style Ampeg, and I was like so disappointed, It's like, I was like, oh, that's not like loud enough, whatever. But and then then they got signed to Matador, and their record fucking broke loose, and I was working at the record store at the time, so I kind of got to see like, holy shit, like this, didn't see that coming. This record sounded like hotcakes, and it was, and it's, it's a great record. I don't know. I mean, and then he had asked the Broke Review to do this like leg of a U.S. tour with them, and like we were like, we didn't come from that world. We were, like I said, we were kind of more in this like underground garage rock ghetto sort of arty world, But like, to Daniel's credit, like he kind of took a band, like he kind of took a chance on us for whatever reason, and we ended up doing some shows on the Northeast with him, And then I just sort of had lost touch with him for a very, very, very long time, and I think because he was just touring the world, he was just never home, like for many years. They just like record after record tour, and they and to their credit, I mean, they are like a very, and I'm not saying this because I'm in the band, but also just because I have experience. Like they still work very hard, you know, like they still tore their asses off. They still, you know, I mean, they're still on that sort of like work ethic of like, you know, like
they're also, this is something they're really smart dudes. Like it seems like Paul and Daniel are both like, so they're both fluent in a couple languages, right? Like they're like fucking really smart guys.
Yeah, no, totally. You know, I mean, I forget how many languages Daniel speaks, but you know, it's like Spanish, Italian, you know, French, and then Paul's very, very fluent in like Spanish.
You know what's funny is I didn't realize Paul was from England until this week. And you know, on the first record when he announces the song before Stella was a driver, and you hear him like with the English accent. I thought that was a fake English accent. So I was always like, why is he doing a fake English accent?
Well, I mean, that's actually, I think, him with ice cubes in his mouth is the story. That's him saying with ice cubes in his mouth. Yeah. But yeah, just to their credit, they've always worked and toured very hard, you know? But yeah, I think it was 2010. I basically get a call out of the blue. Because so I think 2010, like they had this sort of like really bad year where like they had gotten dropped from Capitol Records and ended up back on Matador, and then Carlos, their bass player, quit the band, and then they had lost their management. They had some manager who was like Coldplay manager or something. So they were just having this year, but then they got Dave Pajo from the band Slint. You guys familiar with Slint and all that?
Yeah.
Great guy. And he's actually, even before the Interpol thing, he was a friend of mine. Like I just was always a fan and, you know, met him and knew all of the solo stuff. So I was like, oh, it's cool. They got Pajo. You know, they were just sort of like making their way through this really devastating year for them career-wise, you know? And then... yeah, somewhere like the end of 2010, I get a call from Daniel, and I don't call him back. What am I doing at this time? And I kind of had this period of time where, like, you know, I was like playing in bands, but I was just playing sort of random bands, and I wasn't in anything full time, and like I didn't really have my own projects, and like also like had this sort of like accidental career happen where I became this like tour manager, which was like, what the fuck, you know? And so like, you know, so Keith, like, so like, that's what it was. I quit drinking, I quit doing drugs, I get clean. And, you know, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing in my life. I don't even know if I can play music anymore. You know what I mean? Like just real lost. And then, you know, I start playing with some friends and bands and projects, and then like this band you know, kind of basically came out of like the, you know, DIY Brooklyn thing, Animal Collective. I'd become friends with them and like Black Dice, who Black Dice till this day are still my favorite band out of this place. Anyway, they asked me if I wanted to like go on tour with them, like drive, sell merch, you know, and it was this tour they were doing with Black Dice in like early 2004, you know, and I did it, and I had such a blast. It was like the first time I'd been on tour forever, you know. But long story short, just like flash forward, that was like 2004, 2010. I somehow have this like accidental career as a tour manager, which is like, you know, and I'm like a musician. I'm not a tour manager, you know what I mean? But I keep getting asked by these bands, like, and it was just like, you know, like Animal Collective, and then it was like the Fleet Foxes, and it was Beach House, then it was like Blonde Redhead, like all these, like, I don't know, you know what I mean? It's like
those are like all the big 2010 bands.
Yeah, but it was just weird because like I'm not a professional dude. You know what I mean? Like I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I just know how to go on tour, you know?
Yeah.
Like I know how to drive. I know how to like, you know, whatever. I know how to do that stuff, you know? And I guess that's what maybe made me an inkling of a good tour manager, was just that I was more in the band mindset than like the guy trying to control the band, you know?
Yeah.
It was just like, well, but anyway, it was just sort of this like accidental career, and like, but I was kind of getting burnt out on it because it was like, that's the thing, being a musician, and, it's just like, I was sick of going on tour, not playing music, even though it was like affording me a life and, working with all these really cool people and getting to travel all over the world and stuff, it was still like, it's, touring's like soul sucking. So it was like,
oh yeah,
if I'm not going to be out there playing, like, and at the time, sorry if I'm rambling.
Oh no, go ahead.
At the time, I was on this like really kind of cool tour. So there's this like famous. You ever heard of this like UK folk guitarist named Bert Jansch?
No.
Okay.
No.
So Bert Jansch is like this UK legendary folk guy who like, so like Neil Young will say like, there's two guitarists in the world that inspired me. Jimi Hendrix on the electric guitar and Bert Jansch on the acoustic guitar.
Wow.
And then a certain point in the sort of like indie world, and we're talking like Drag City and like post sort of like Animal Collective, Devendra Banhart, all of these, whatever you would call it, like freak folk movement of like the 2000s.
Yeah.
Like people would sort of look up to like this guy, Bert Jansch, or like Vashti Bunyan and all these like sort of obscure UK folk musicians,
Mm-hmm.
I find myself in 2010 tour managing this gentleman, Bert Jansch, this legendary dude, as he's opening for Neil Young, who's playing solo. So like on this tour, looking after Bert Jansch, who just was in remission from cancer. He was older. It was like basically touring with like your very cool grandfather,
Yeah. Wow.
But then getting to like watch Neil Young blow minds every night, like
wow.
Whatever. It was just so surreal. In the middle of that tour, I get a call from Daniel, which I was like, why is this guy calling me? He leaves a message, hey, can you call me back? I never called him back. And then I get like an email. Hey, Daniel, did you get my message? Call me back,
Mm-hmm.
Didn't email him back. And I don't even know why. I guess I started thinking like, oh, like maybe he's reaching out to me because someone in the band needs to go to rehab or something,
Right.
Like someone needs to get their shit together, and he's like calling me, to ask advice,
Yeah, whenever anyone needs to talk to me, I'm just like, what went wrong?
Yeah.
Like, I need to know what went wrong and what I'm gonna have to do.
And like honestly, I was like too busy, like touring with this guy Bert Jansch and Neil Young to like call him back.
Yeah.
I kind of had to like look after this guy and whatever, And then he calls me again. It's like, please call me back. It's very important,
Oh, boy.
So finally I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. All right. Like call this guy back. And then I call him, and then he's like, hey, would you play bass for Interpol?
Wow.
Which like I had to think about, you know what I mean? Like, just because it was like, it's so far removed from that music, I guess, or like, I don't know. I was sort of deep into some weird, like psychedelic kind of post-punk, weird experimental shit. You know what I mean? And this was basically like some commercial alternative band calling me, So I was like, is this cool? Like, is this like, I don't know, like I just really had to think about it and like ask some people, but like he needed an answer right away, because they're like, we're fucked. We have these tours coming up and like,
it's funny that you still have that decision in your mind, because like I've done that with bands I've been in, which are just like very, very, very small bands, and I'm like, is this really for me? Like, do I really want to do this? But like, you get called and asked to be an Interpol, and you're like, I don't know if this is like for me. Like, I don't know.
So it was just weird, but like, but I mean, pretty quickly, I think everyone that I'd sort of asked, were like, yeah, you got to do it, dude. You know what I mean? Like, fuck, you're a musician, not a tour manager. You got to do this. And then I called Paho, because I was like, what's the deal? Like, what really happened, Paho? You know what I mean? But like Paho legitimately had to quit because of family obligations, and he was in like, he just had his own, whatever.
Right.
And then luckily enough, because I was friends with Paho when I decided to do it. You know, and that's sort of another thing. Like when I decided, I said yes, I do it. I had a very short window to learn a band's discography. You know.
Yeah. Now, at this point, they have what, 3 LPs out,
they
and
were
then
on their,
probably other
they
singles.
were on their 4th LP.
Okay, so how much? Now, this is a recurring theme I talk about on the show.
Okay.
I have a recurring nightmare where the band's about to go on, and they're like, you got to learn it now. We're going on, and I've talked to a lot of musicians who've done that, and they've pulled it off, and I'm always amazed by it because I've done 2 tryout situations. One was okay, but I needed a lot of help, and one was a disaster. So, how much time do you have to learn these songs?
I have 1 month. I have 1 solid month, I think it turned out.
Yeah. Now, take us through some of the process, because I'm always really curious about how people do it.
Okay, so when I decide to do it, I'm like, oh, this should be easy because I'm like still like ignorantly thinking it's just like Joy Division sounding band, you know?
Yeah.
Of like, oh, those post-punk bass lines, I can eat those for breakfast. I grew up. That's how I taught myself how to play bass, like The Cure and Joy Division and all those, like, you know, English punk, post-punk bands, you know? Like PIL.
Right.
Like, that's what I know how to do. You know what I mean? Even though, like, I haven't done that music in a long time. So it's like, in my mind, I was like, so this should be a piece of cake.
Yeah.
And then Daniel sends me the discography. And then not only does he send me the discography, I think at this point, you know, 2010 technologies, where he's like, I can also send you the bass stems.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So I basically, for a month, and this is what I learned very quickly. Like, okay, I'm going to learn this stuff, you know, listen to the song. Seems simple enough. Listen to the bass stem. I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Now, when I think
like,
of incredible bass playing, I always think of Carlos from Interpol. There is so much nuance and just so much bounciness and movement and awesome stuff happening in those bass lines. I would be scared to learn that all, especially in just a month's time.
Well, yeah. So instantly it hits me like, okay, he's kind of like the lead instrument in this band. He's like the lead guitar in this band. You know what I mean? And like, it's way more technical than I ever imagined.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, because it's not just root notes. Like, that's what people think typically with it. It's, oh, I'll just play along with whatever the root notes are. And it's like, no, it's not that 100%.
Yeah. So it's like him and Sam are like the driving sort of lead instrumentation, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, what the fuck did I get myself into? You know what I mean? But basically, for that whole month, I just basically like lived and breathed those songs. Like I did not, you know, and it's weird because like, you know, I'm avid music listener. And during that month, I remember like a lot of my friends sending me their new records that I was psyched to hear, but I could not listen to them because I have to really only listen to Interpol, you know?
Right. And do you have to learn every song? Are they like just learn every song, or did they give you like a set?
They gave me like a set, like 3 sets almost worth of stuff, you know, so they could rotate stuff out, which, you know, is kind of like their discography, you know. They're not like big on the B-sides or playing, you know what I mean? It's like deep album cuts or whatever. So, I mean, so yeah, it was like very overwhelming just because like, but there's this beautiful thing that happens, you know, I don't know, it's like a real lesson in humility, and just like the ego thing, you know? Because like basically I had to learn Carlos's bass parts verbatim, note for note, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I kind of come out of this like sloppy DIY, like improvisation, you know what I mean? Like more damage, you know, there's always room to like fuck up and make mistakes and like, you know, and maybe that's a good thing, you know, just real loosey goosey, you know? But so I had to, you know, in that band, there can be no mistakes because like obviously the fans are so obsessive, they'll hear it, you know?
Yeah.
And then also, you know, that like Interpol isn't like a loosey goosey jam band thing or whatever, you know?
Especially
like,
the rhythm
especially
section.
the rhythm
The guitars maybe a little bit, but not the rhythm section.
So I like really had to learn it verbatim note for note, you know, which was like very frustrating and very hard. I think even for the first few weeks, I didn't know he was even playing in drop D. So like making like having that little note kind of like was like, oh man, you know, like no wonder I've been banging my head or whatever. So I mean, and then, okay, so also this goes back to like Pajo, is that he was living in Philly in the time, and I called him up and I was like, hey man, can you like come like stay the night and just like, you know, coach me, you know? And so that one night he kind of coached me, and I sort of videoed him, you know, because I was like running out of time. You know what I mean? It was like cramming before the test, you know?
Right.
So that was like Pajo was like my cheat sheet, you know? And
awesome.
Just making sure I was doing it right, and, you know? But this beautiful thing happened where it was like, and I had this other band at the time that was sort of like this like super group, kind of like we put out a record on this label in Brooklyn called Mexican Summer. And but we're mostly improvised, you know, and like we were sort of like the anti-band, this band called Soldiers of Fortune, where it's like we don't write songs, we don't rehearse, we just play shows, you know, we just like any, you know, and just like it's like a hurricane, you know, it's like sink or swim, you know, and there's just these amazing players. I remember right before I went to go rehearse with Interpol for the first time, I'd played a show with them. And because I'd been so locked in for a month learning these bass lines, Carlos's bass lines note for note, and like having to like rewire my brain to like play like exactly like somebody else. And like really, like I said, taking my ego out of it, you know, like
which is hard for me at least.
I showed up and played this like improvised show with this band Souls of Fortune. And like it was just noticeable how in that month of learning somebody else's technique and bass lines and whatever, and like rewiring my brain and not making it about myself, and like, okay, and I'm just going to preface this by saying like still to this day I still feel like a 13-year-old kid who's picking up the bass for the first time who does not know what he's doing. I'm completely self-taught, never had a music lesson in my life. I can only play by ear listening to records. You know what I mean?
Same. Yeah. Yep.
But it was the first time ever that I was like, oh my God, I think I just became a better musician. You know what I mean? Of like what would probably take me like 10 years of like some technique or something, learning a technique or something on the bass, like I had just done in that month from learning these fucking Interpol songs. You know what I mean? And I don't know if it makes sense, but it was just something I so badly wanted like 100%. To thank Carlos for. You know what I mean? Like had I not done that, my growth would still have been stunted, you know?
Yeah, those crash courses are awesome because I was in a hardcore band like 5 years ago where I was the only guitar player. So for the first time, it was all on me, and just leaps and bounds in like what I was doing. I still think about some of the songs I wrote, and I'm like, how did I do that? Like I love those breakthroughs.
I was gonna say one of the connections I made with when I hear you talk about that, it's like I spent the first. So I'm a teacher for a living, and I taught English and writing for the first 6 years that I taught. And one of the math teachers, I was sitting there talking to her one day, and she was like, hey, you know, we just lost a math teacher, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, that sucks, man. Like, I can do percentages, and like I know fractions pretty well, and I can do some basic algebra, but I don't think I could teach math. And she's like, hold on a second. She found this course for me, and through Rutgers, I got my math certification in about 13 months. But I retaught myself Algebra 1, and I hadn't been in a math class since I was 18 years old. And I remember, like, sitting in the library by myself on Saturday mornings. I would get up at 6 and I would be there at 7 when the place opened, like with a full, like 32-ounce coffee. And I would just go through this. And I had a realization of like, oh my God, if I had actually fucking applied myself when I went to school, how different my life would have turned out. I would fucking be a doctor or something right now. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, if I had this kind of focus where I was like, all right, there's a lot at stake and I have something to prove and I have to be able to do this. And there's like a test at the end of this. Like the same thing, like it's performing live. I have to prove to people that I can do the same thing. It's just, you're able to harness your brain's power, and it's fucking amazing what you're able to do when you really are focused. Like that.
I agree. Totally agree.
So when you join Interpol, do they issue you a suit and sunglasses?
That's like the thing everyone always asks. Here's the vibe. So basically, like, it's never said you have to wear a suit. You know, it's just there's no contract or written thing or whatever. You know. I chose to wear a suit because otherwise, compared to those guys, I would look like a junkie homeless guy. You know what I mean?
And that's, I think I'm just always curious about that because I would match the vibe of whatever band I'm in. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and if they're up there in suits and sunglasses and you're wearing like jeans and a t-shirt, you're going to look dumb.
Yeah. And I kind of, you know, the only way I sort of let my freak flag fly in the beginning of that band was just to not cut my hair, you know, like I'm not fucking cutting the hair. I mean, God, I wish I did, like looking back, you know what I mean? Like I just hate myself looking at those old pictures of me, and you know what I mean? Like, cause the long hair and suit just never works. It just doesn't, you know? No. But like, I also just found the suit kind of like, I mean, because I'd never, ever in my life had ever wore a suit, you know, in a band particularly, you know, not any band I can think of. It was just, you know, you wear what you wear, you know?
Exactly.
But the suit, like I didn't want to stick out, you know, I wanted to be in the background, in the cut. But it also kind of like, for whatever reason, and it really helped me get into like, and this sounds corny, but it's just bear with me, you know. In particularly for Interpol, it got me into character. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense. Where it's just like, okay,
it absolutely
am
does.
In this band, you know, I am playing this band's music, you know, and not to say that it's like I'm an actor or, you know, theater or something, but it just, the vibe, it helps you get into like the fucking mojo, the vibe or whatever, you know, of that environment.
I totally get it. Having done a very little bit of acting, I totally get it. I totally get it.
No, because if I'm joining GZ Top, I'm fucking growing a beard.
Like,
you know, like,
I'm getting a fucking leather jacket, dude. I'm fucking doing it.
And I feel like
I gotta get a hot rod.
As I've been in the band for a long time now, I feel like the more I'm like, just like, I'm fucking into it. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of want to, I mean, they, you know, whatever. I'm kind of like, I want to be more the gothy character guy, you know what I mean? And they're kind of like, they're not into that shit. You know what I mean? I mean, they're into dressing nice and looking nice, but you know what I mean? Like, I want to get into like the Dark Lord zone, you know, like full.
Yeah, I'm in that zone. I wear all black
like
all the time.
Full Marilyn Manson on their ass. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I like that.
Keith, I was gonna say, Keith, you have that aesthetic of like, you keep your, like, you dress very nicely. Like every time I see you, you're very sharply dressed.
Oh, well, thank you guys. That feels good. It helps that my girlfriend is a stylist as well, so I'm taking it to the next level now.
But basically, just going back to the outfit thing, I think it's not implied a suit, but it's like, you know, look nice, wear black. When in doubt, wear black. You know what I mean? Because you can look nice in a black collared shirt and black jeans and whatever, you know.
Interpol did a run of shows with U2. Were you a part of that tour?
Yes.
Now, I gotta ask, playing with U2, like what is it like being on a tour like that? I imagine stadiums and like a giant backstage area with like a carving station, and there's like a chef with a hat and like all this stuff. Like, what is it like?
I mean, that it's sort of been my experience in any band that I've been in, that like whenever you think you've reached some sort of like level, it's actually the same thing in disguise. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
I'm trying to think how I could say this. Okay, so like we're on this U2 tour. We're playing football stadiums, literally football stadiums, and they got their big, massive 360 fucking Art Deco Spider from Mars kind of stage, and it's like 60,000 people, Our dressing room is like some cement locker room, that is completely isolated from the rest of society, like it's not saying it's like a broom closet, but you know what I mean? Like you would not know where the hell you were. We could hide in there, no one would ever find us, like it's just, it's like, yeah, I mean, sure. Like there was a catering thing, but the catering thing's like 2 miles away and, then like you go in and it's just like your normal buffet thing, you know what I mean? So it's not like, I guess, the glitz and glamour that one would think of, it's still like, it's like a stadium's version of a shitty backstage. You know what I mean? Like I guess if that makes sense, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just always...
So it's pretty much the same thing, just in a stadium and maybe like some more space.
You know what I mean? And you're completely isolated from them and you're completely isolated from your friends that come to the show and like, you know what I mean? Like, and then it's just it's obviously a surreal experience playing in front of a big audience that is only there to see the band you're opening for. So like you could just be a drone, you know what I mean? They're just like, get over with so we can see fucking U2. You know what I mean? I mean, we never got like booed, or anything like that, but it was just definitely like, I remember looking into this sort of like half, people are just coming in while we're playing and the people that are watching this all have like the 1,000-yard stare, of, like, okay, yeah, whatever. Get off, like we got your Sunday Bloody Sunday, or whatever.
So is it super scary, like walking out and playing a gig like that? Now, the recent experience I've had, I was in a play, I think last year, but I was the lead in the play, and I was so scared beforehand I could barely eat, and when I walk out on the stage, it's kind of like a flash of white light, and you're like, oh my God. But then you're just in it and you're doing it. Like what? Or do you have enough experience now that you're just like, no, like this is a gig and I'm playing it?
I mean, and I've talked to other musicians about this. For some reason, and like and obviously Interpol has done some really huge shows, and and it's funny because like the longer I've been in the band and every time we sort of do a tour, like the label, the manager, even the band is like, yeah, this is like the biggest show we've ever done. I've heard that so many times, and in my mind it all just sort of looks the same, like it's like a festival or whatever, so it's sort of like at a certain point you just can't really tell how many people are there, and like you almost don't want to know because then that would make you sort of nervous, obviously. But long story short, and those things are very surreal and they can be very much like just a blur, because of like adrenaline or whatever, and sometimes they can be very robotic, which sucks because you're not like connected to the, but like as far as me, like I get like, and I'm just saying only in the Interpol world, like we've done some like huge festivals, like thousands of people, and we've headlined our own shows with like thousands and thousands of people. But I get so much more nervous overall in general if like I'm playing a show to like 15 friends. You know what I mean? I get totally
it's
like,
always
totally just like freaked out,
with
and
friends,
like scared,
it's always
insecure.
with friends and people I know.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Same. And I get nervous before everything. It's just a question of how nervous am I going to
Yeah.
get? Like, I don't know. I have a lot of anxiety in general. So I don't know. Before some podcast episodes, I'm like, whatever, it's going to be fine. Before some, I'm like completely breaking down and I'm like, all right, you'll be fine once you get into it. It's just, I don't know. I deal with a lot of anxiety. But, question for you. Now, you mentioned earlier that you like, got clean and quit drinking and stuff. Do you ever find it difficult to be on
Sure.
tour and like balance that? Now, I've talked about this before. I did the same thing. Like I quit drinking and I quit everything else because my life was just so completely out of control. And it was hard in the beginning when I was trying to live my life the same way, but just with that out of it. I'd go to parties or hang out with the same friends or go to shows and I'd be like, oh man, this is hard. But I don't really think about it so much anymore. Like I go to the show, I watch the band and I go home. That's it. But I mean, do you find it difficult ever?
I mean, in the beginning or now or what?
How about now?
No. I mean, like, I guess I just had the experience early on because, like, look, like, I mean, the way that I look at it, the way that I like used or whatever, like, I was never, it kind of like took the whole thing away from me. You know what I mean? Like music, going out, like the whole social element. It's like I could not do that. I was too sick. You know what I mean? I couldn't tour anymore. I was too sick. I couldn't be in a band anymore. I couldn't fucking stomach even make it to rehearsal, let alone I'm not going to get in a van for 8 hours. And I'm certainly not going to go in a room full of people. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So early on, I really had this like experience of, well, I mean, yeah, early on, I thought that part of my life was over. Right. And then like, sort of like a person said to me, it's like, not only are you going to be able to do that again, but you're going to be able to do it better, which
Yes.
at that point, I really needed to hear something like that, because like I was just thinking like, I can't do anything ever again. That's just, like whatever.
Yeah. I never played music like unless I was on something ever. So I didn't know if I was going to be able to once I stopped doing all that. Or once I stopped doing all that.
So like the early experience I had of going to shows, particularly, was that, oh my God, like I'm really connecting with the music, like I was like really feeling the music and like really focused on the band. I wasn't focused on like who's drinking or who's using, it was just like, I'm in this fucking zone and I'm feeling this fucking music. And particularly early on, like the louder and more damaged and fucking sonically monstrous a band was, the better. You know what I mean? Like it was just like, I wanted to be just, it was like, kind of this like new drug, if you will, like extreme.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And so, and then, through that, I was becoming more social with people, with other music people, and just like I was having a good time, it was like, oh, this is fun. Like if you take like the substances out of this, like this is actually like a great experience. You know what I mean? Like it can be a great experience. Like I had no idea, and then like same thing with like music, like playing music, it's just like, I don't know, it just kind of came back and like, that person turns out to be right. Even though I still feel like the 13-year-old kid who doesn't know what he's doing, like,
oh yeah,
I see that I've gotten a lot better at music, or being in bands, like creatively and things like that. You know what I mean? Like and just stuff I never would have been able to do otherwise, So I always kind of go back to like, I'm here because I made a decision to not destroy my life. You know what I mean? Like I like everything that is revolves around the whole music thing that I do and projects is because of like, I don't have this thing. I'm killing myself basically. Like it doesn't fit, that piece of the puzzle doesn't fit into the puzzle anymore is what I'm saying,
Yeah, exactly. Like I have so much energy now to actually do things. I put out a record a couple years ago we're doing this podcast, which kind of came out of nowhere. And it's just, you actually have the energy and the motivation to actually do things. Because I wasn't doing shit before. I reached a point where I wasn't playing music at all anymore. And I just sat inside and watched The Sopranos for like the 45th time. And that was basically it.
And and I gotta say, it is a slow process. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, like, whatever. If I would have joined a band like Interpol the first year, I would have, I quit doing drugs. I probably would have done drugs. You know what I mean? Like, it was sort of this like slow sort of, things kind of falling into place, and like, I wouldn't say like in a weird way, it was like sort of working again, in the sense that like I got to kind of start from ground zero and build this sort of new muscle back, or new fucking mentality back, and like just really appreciate things for what they were, and like like, I guess almost like pay your dues again, almost, I guess, but be grateful that you're able to pay your dues. You know what I mean? Be grateful that, like, whatever. It's funny now because of like I don't know, it's funny, particularly in these times that we're in now, and there's no live music and no touring specifically, like, and like, I think the hardest part of any kind of tour, and I've been on every kind of tour imaginable, from like the smallest DIY sleeping on floors to like, these sort of grand Interpol ones or whatever. And the hardest part of touring is just the traveling. It doesn't matter if you're traveling in comfort or not. It's still, that's like the real grind and hard work of the life. The plane is the easiest part. That's like, that's what we're all killing ourselves to do for like 90 minutes or an hour or whatever, but the rest of the 22 hours is like the real grind, and it really doesn't matter if you're in a shitty van sleeping on floors or if you're in a fucking tour bus. It's still the kind of the same thing, and I don't know. That sounds stupid to say, what I mean, for people that haven't experienced that.
It absolutely
but
doesn't.
It's still, dude, you're still traveling and eating like shit and not sleeping. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I've done it both in bands and for my job. My job has a lot of travel, or it did at least. I haven't traveled since November, thankfully. And I'm flying on a plane in a nice coach seat, and I'm staying in a hotel, and I fucking hate it. It sucks, and you're away from your comfort, you're away from your routine, you're away from your normal food, you're eating at Chili's and stuff. I mean, Chili's is okay, but fuck, like it's tough.
Oh, Chili's isn't okay. Stop.
Hey, I grew up in suburbia. I like chain restaurants, and I'm not ashamed.
I can't stand. Ugh, I can't stand that. But my thing is, like, I always think about this, like with. I have the same anxiety with traveling, and I look forward to certain things. Like my family and I we're gonna go down the shore. We'll go to the beach, and that first like 2 days, I'm in this like, yes, we're here. This is great. And then I wake up on that third or fourth day, and I'm like, I want my bed. I want my house. I want my things. Like it's the uncomfortability of that. Whereas it gets exponentially worse is what I'm trying to say. Is like it gets to the point where you get fed up with not having the way, like the things that you're used to and the routines that you're used to, especially now. Like I'm like absolutely dreading going back to school because I've gotten comfortable with getting up at a specific time, doing what I want, like making breakfast with my kids. Like it's just like it's really hard to be like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to get up at fucking 5 a.m. and make coffee and drive 30 minutes in traffic. Like that part of that thing wears thin, at least for me, very quickly. And at first, like when you go to like do that, like as you're living, like that to me, like, Keith, when you talk about traveling for work and you're like, oh, I'm going to be in this place for, a week. I'm like, ew.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is what I was going to say basically about all that stuff is like, so like I guess it was yesterday, the day before, this tour that I was supposed to be on right now with like Stephen Malcolmus. There's always, and particularly in the United States, there's always these infamous drives. They're just brutal and killer. And this is what always blows like UK and European musicians' minds when they come to the United States. They're like, 8 hours is a long drive. That's like all day to them, because they're used to going from like, like whatever. Not saying that like London to Paris isn't, but like, once you're in a country, they're just kind of relatively like 3 or 4 hour drives. But in the United States, we inevitably have these long, brutal drives that we have to make overnight or a travel day, And so one of the drives I was supposed to be on the day before yesterday is that sort of Portland to San Francisco, which, is all day, it's just a long, torturous drive, and so what I just was going to say, it's like, I will never take any drive like that for granted ever again. And I actually woke up today from like a couple of the Interpol crew guys, like someone had forwarded an article in relation to like, there's always this like Minneapolis to Seattle drive, which takes days, like it's like a brutal thing. And that's somehow just tours are booked, unless you can play like South Dakota or like Missouri. It's just sometimes you just got, or not Missouri, I'm sorry, Montana. Sometimes you just got to do this brutality, Minneapolis to Seattle, and it's just brutal. But one of the Interpol crew guys, it's like, well, this puts Seattle and Minneapolis into perspective, because I guess like there used to be this drive for workers from London to Calcutta that would take 7 weeks.
Oh my God.
It would take 7 weeks.
God.
We were just like,
Wow.
oh my God, like just from one point to another, it would take 7 weeks just to get to your
I can't
job
even
or
imagine
whatever.
that.
So anyway, I'm just saying in these, the sort of, I will never take sort of touring for granted, those crazy things that we have to do out there,
Yeah, and the payoff is you get to play the fucking awesome show. Like me, I take a plane to go sit in an office like for 8 hours, which is absolutely soul crushing.
I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to drop this for both Tommy and you, Keith, that because we're all watching like documentaries and reading books, and very educational time right now, as it should be, and this is just music related, because it was like something that just made me really psyched this week, like a documentary that just was like, I don't know, just kind of to talk about what we've all been talking about. But you should check out this documentary called Desolation Center. And essentially what it is in the 80s, and it kind of ties into like this like police brutality that, is in what we're dealing with today in the world, is like in LA in the 80s, you had your punk rock scene, and like goes back to what I was saying, like the eclecticness of like punk rock particularly in the early days, was like, you would have Black Flag, you would have the Screamers, you would have the Germs, and they were all sounded so completely different from one another, but they would put on these shows, and then long story short, like the police would come in and bust up these shows and like brutalize people, and like it was sort of like the police were, out to just kill the punks, basically, So one of the guys sort of that came out of that scene in LA was like, oh, I'm going to start doing these like remote location shows where like they're not advertised. They're not, we're not going to sell drinks. We're not going to like do the normal shit. They'll just be like these, like, we'll find these remote locations, get a couple bands, get a generator, get like some resemblance of a PA, and so basically, long story short, in the documentary, just they find these like remote desert locations, and like one of the first shows that they do is like the Minutemen and Savage Republic, and it's like they basically hire a few buses, like school buses, to drive to LA to this remote location in the desert, and you roll up, and it's like this, like crazy landscape, and then the fucking Minutemen are playing, you know?
Well, is that where like Caius and stuff came out of? That
This
whole
is all
scene?
pre stuff. This is really has less to do about desert
Oh,
rock of just like, and then like the next show they do, it's like, Einsters and Neubauten, like this like German industrial band who actually do like, you know, use industrial tools and like saws to cut through steel and stuff, you know.
yeah.
And then they do like a show with like Sonic Youth and Red Cross and Minutemen and the Meat Puppets and like, but anyway, it was just sort of like, and then it didn't last very long. And then, but it also was the very genesis of what would decades later become like Lollapalooza, Coachella, and Burning. That's the sort of irony of it. But like, it seemed, I was just so inspired because like those bands I was talking about, early on, just like that sort of like eclectic, like every band sounding differently and just having an experience at a show, you know, it just makes you totally psyched, particularly in this time of like no live music and like, you know, and like, you know, until there's a vaccine, we're going to have to rethink how things are going to be put on, you know. But it was just like that. Right. It just made me sort of like, I don't know if nostalgic or psyched for like this, like, ooh, this remote location guerrilla DIY thing, you know?
I like that. Now that reminds me, I'm going to check out that documentary, but that reminds me, like, back in the day, I used to go to like psytrance shows, which I hated the scene, but I liked the drugs. So I would go to the shows because my friends were into it and, you know, all that. And they would have raves in the middle of the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. Yeah, and I would go, and like the directions would be like, you know, make a right turn at mile marker X, drive, and make a left and a right. And you'd be in this clearing in the woods, and they would have a rave, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. I'm highly recommending it. It's such an inspiring documentary. But it also is like, I wonder if you could ever get away with doing that kind of shit anymore, you know? Just the way things are.
There's got to be somewhere.
Like,
I'm sure.
I mean, I think like the remote location thing would be the hardest part at this point. You know.
Yeah, because here's the thing: once you have the information age of like people can pin things, people can use like geolocators and stuff like that. It's fucked. Like, because like as many people as you have there, there's gonna be one dickhead that goes, "Hey, check out where the fuck I am," and then
yeah, I forgot to take social media into account.
Yeah, you got to think that's one of those things. It's like I think about how social media has connected so many people, and it's been such an amazing experience to be a part of it. But there's other times where you're going like, ugh, I fucking wish I didn't hear some of these people's opinions. God, they were so much better when they were silent.
I don't want to go on another rant, but like, you know,
do it.
But like, I feel like there's this key elemental thing that I grew up with, like sort of my generation and the bands, and even, you know, just talking about that sort of eclecticness of not falling into like a genre, but like making your own individual sort of genre sound or whatever, you know. You know, a big element that is really missing is this thing called boredom. You know, where like no one knows how to be bored anymore. You know, because
there's not 1 second during the day where I'm not doing something now. Whether it's video games, podcasts, YouTube, social media, work. Like I have to be doing something every minute.
And I think that's just for most of us in the world. You know what I mean? But there was a certain point where like boredom really kind of like invented so many of the most creative things ever, you know, like creating your own music world, you know, whatever. I don't know. It's just, I'm not a philosopher, but I feel like there's some sort of like philosophical discussion that needs to be had about bringing boredom back.
Brad, I have to bring up something very important. Do you realize that when Tommy starts a new television show, he watches the first episode.
So it has to be a non-serialized one.
No, let me finish. When Tommy starts a new TV show, he watches the first episode of the season and then the last episode of the season.
Of like
and
The
if
Wire?
He likes both, he watches the whole thing. How fucking insane is that?
So all right. So let me. There's a caveat to this. It can't be something that each episode depends upon the episode prior to it. So, for example, if you were to, like, say you never heard of The Simpsons and you were like, oh, I'm going to fucking watch The Simpsons, you can go and say, all right, I'm going to watch season 3 and I'm going to watch the first episode and I'll watch the last episode. Because when you look at the way people write, especially TV shows now, is like they write them in the last 30 or some odd years. The first, the season opener and the season closer are the strongest episodes. So that's my kind of barometer of what fucking makes sense.
That's crazy.
That's what you care about. Like,
it's a good way to, like, gauge if this is worth my time, because fuck, man, there's 13 episodes in between this first one and this last one. I'm not going to spend a good chunk of my life spending time watching something that sucks. Like,
I'm down.
Well, it's just not the way to do things. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to put my foot down this.
But so I think if you guys help me start a Bring Boredom Back campaign.
That's good. Bring boredom back and start by listening to the Northeast Scene podcast.
Totally.
No.
Yeah.
I'm just. So, Brad, let's wind down here. Let's talk about some projects. Let's talk about some things you have coming up and some places we can check you out. Now, we've got Traditional Techniques happening, right? That's going to be happening.
Yeah, I guess rescheduled for next year.
All right. And what else can we look forward to?
Oh man. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I'm like kind of, because I haven't been playing with people, I've just been making a lot of crusty ambient music by myself that I just post on SoundCloud all the time for nothing. And I sort of have like my own thing with that. Then I have another project called Frenemas with my friend. That's, we're trying to make our own version. Like, speaking of creating subgenres, I have this like idea of doing like, like crust ambient music, which is like,
I love that.
Like sort of anarchistic ambient music, but like if you took like Eno and like rudimentary PNI or something,
Wow.
Like, what would that sound like, But
I really want to know, because I'm big into like ambient post-rock type stuff, and just mixing crust in sounds like an amazing idea.
Yeah. So I'm working on a couple of projects like that, and then I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. Everything band-wise is on hold until I'll let you guys know if I get tested negative or positive, and my bandmates do, and we can play again.
Yes.
Or at least jam again, or whatever that means,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I unfortunately, I'm not on social media, which is, good and bad.
I think that's fortunate.
I think like, outside of like YouTube and SoundCloud, our Bandcamp, hopefully this whole Bandcamp thing is very intriguing.
Yes. Bandcamp is good. I've got a record up on there. And
yeah, it just seems like the DIY, almost like punk version of these other streaming things that are in favor of the artist.
Exactly. It's the way to go, and you can set up a store and people can buy the record directly from you. And
and they like waive fees this Friday, like every so often.
They do that a lot for charities too, and I love that. That's great stuff. Well, we look forward to more, Brad, and we just want to thank you for coming on. This is awesome. I love this podcast because, like, I'm a really shy person, and I probably wouldn't call you under normal circumstances, like, to ask a bunch of questions about your life and all this stuff, even though I would want to. So just having this podcast, like, it empowers me to get to know people, and even like friends I've had for a long time. Like I get to ask them all kinds of questions and stuff that I never would otherwise. So, I just want to say thanks a lot for coming on.
Oh, Keith and Tommy, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry if I talked your ear off. I just don't ever I don't ever get to talk about music with people much these days.
A lot of people tell us that, and it's awesome. It was bad timing for a lot of things, but perfect timing for this podcast because a lot of people are coming on, and a lot of people are saying like, this is such a great outlet to get to talk about music and everything else. So it's awesome.
Yeah. I don't like talking about myself, but I like talking about music. You know, so if you guys just want to talk about music on the next episode, make it 4 hours. Just do a marathon.
Shit,
but we should do like a 24-hour podcast, man. You guys ever
just
thought
see
about
where the
doing
conversation goes.
That's a great idea. I've had
24 hours.
I've had some similar thoughts about other things, but we'll talk about those offline so the other podcasts don't steal them.
Oh, yeah, sorry. But I want to be a part of it. I want to be a guest for 6 hours on this potential idea.
We're gonna talk about that because that sounds intriguing. So, Brad, thank you again for being on. Tommy, some closing words?
So I don't want to get super heavy. No, I'm going to.
Do it.
Please.
Today is July 1st. I don't know when this is going up, but today is 33 years since my father has died. So,
oh man.
It's really weird because I've talked with like my sisters, and we kind of like, we always touch base on this day just to kind of like, see how everybody's doing and shit. And my sister, she's a teacher at a Catholic school, she was like, oh, well, everything happens for a reason. I'm like, do you really think so? do you really think, like if there's a God, like he took daddy away because we had learned this lesson? Like, what the fuck? Like, are you out of your mind? And she was like, well, I just think that's, that it's comforting to her. And I think that the thing that I come back to consistently that's comforting to me when I think about this stuff is that, I was 5 when my father passed. And like I have my little girls. I have 3 little girls. And I'm waking. I have my alarm set on my phone for 6:15 in the morning. I wake up 5 days a week with them. And we go to the skate park, and they ride scooters and skateboards, and we get there before like there's a bunch of people there and hang out and just talk, and it's just great to spend time with them. But I always think about this is like people take comfort in different things, but the one thing I take comfort in is that like you don't know when life is going to end, so let that determine what you say and what you think at every moment. So just appreciate what you have when you have it, because you always know that there's something that's going to change, and it could be profound, it could be minuscule, it could be something that's completely banal. But what we consistently now go back to is that life is chaotic, and it's really, really hard for us to look at this and say, what's happening what's happening right now in the world. It seems like utter chaos, but what you have to do is, what I've taken solace in is that I appreciate the small moments, like the quiet breakfast when we're sitting there.
Yes.
Walking the dog in the morning. Like my daughters, we took a walk with the dog yesterday, and they learned how to like hold the dog. This is how you walk a dog, like out on a walk. Like this is what you do to like make sure that like she doesn't get hurt and make sure you're safe. And like, it's just being in that moment. So take every moment that you have here as a gift and be happy with that. Like, because there's so many people that, got a phone call in the last 24 hours that have, changed their life for the worst. And just be really, really happy that what you have right now is something that you can take away from this and go, I can learn from this, and I can be a better person because of it. And
wow.
That's amazing.
I that's the
Jesus. I mean, now I feel stupid about talking about music this whole time.
No,
Tommy,
I mean, let's rewind. Let's start.
No.
This is the start of this.
Guys, we're going
right
long
now.
on this one. We're going long on this one because Tommy, I have to tell you something Brad and Tommy, I have to tell you something that's going to blow your minds right now. All right?
Yeah.
Ready? Tommy, I wasn't gonna say anything about this at all, and this is gonna blow your mind. But my brother died 22 years ago, and today is his birthday.
Get out.
Yeah,
Man.
he would have been 40 today. And like
Holy shit,
for
man.
so many years I didn't acknowledge it or talk about it, or I talked about it at the wrong awkward times to the wrong people, like while all fucked up and all this stuff. And you know, my parents like message me on the day of his death and his birthday and say like stuff, and I would just always ignore it. And now I'll like, I don't know, I'll like say, oh, that's nice, or like send a heart emoji or something. So I've only just begun kind of processing all that. But it's July 1st, man. That's a interesting coincidence.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
It's extraordinarily. It's just one of those things that, like, again, Keith, you and I have had these things that have just been so oddly cosmic.
Yeah.
That, like, you know, like these connections where you just go, "Fuck, that can't be a coincidence, right?" Like, there's someone writing this.
This is very strange. This is like some cosmic.
Yeah, man. Oh,
Wow.
dude. No, see, let's just start. This is how the podcast starts, you know? Like what you guys both just said. This is what it's all about.
Wow.
Not about. I will say, Tommy, speaking to your point, and I'm, sorry for your father's loss, and it seems like the summer is the kind of time for me because my mom died May 15th, and then like my dad, it's his birthday, then it's like Mother's Day and Father's Day, then you know what I mean. Then it's like this, like I'm coming up on an anniversary when I quit doing drugs and all this stuff, so it's such like summer is like a weird time,
Yeah.
to have all these dates, of like loss or whatever. But just something you said about like this time in particular, like I really firmly believe, even though we're living in such like unknown, uncertain, unprecedented times, that we are going to look back at this time so fondly,
Oh yeah.
of like,
no, 100%.
of like, like that was an amazing time for growth, you know what I mean? Or for like, as hell as it is for people, like, oh my God. It's like, and are you guys still there? Sorry.
Oh yeah.
Of course. Yeah. No, we're here.
Like I had the opportunity of touring Serbia once, and like Serbia was a very war-torn country, and like talking to some of the people after the show, they were like, they had kind of like, were almost like, yeah, we kind of almost missed those times when it was like curfew and we had to like huddle together and like listen to records, because we couldn't go outside because people, you know what I mean? Like, it was so weird to hear them like, they were kind of nostalgic for this like war-torn time when there was like a closeness,
Yeah.
like we weren't so tranced out on like distraction,
I actually think about this fairly often. Is that there's a philosopher, his name's Sam Harris, and he does a whole talk about like death, and his whole thing is, and this is kind of a realization I came to about 3 or 4 years ago, but like his entire point when he talks about death is he goes like, look, we know it's all coming. Like we know that at some point in time, either you or someone close to you is going to die. And the real tragedy of all of that situation isn't the death. It's that we convince ourselves that it won't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
We live our lives like it won't. And it's like, no, it will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you better be fucking well aware. Like, this shit's happening.
Well,
But-
and it goes back to like, that's the only truth we have in life.
For sure.
That's it, and we don't choose when and how. That's the other problem,
Yeah, you just never know.
Yeah,
Tommy, your dad didn't know that was happening. You guys didn't know it was happening to him. My brother didn't know that he was going to go to sleep and just never wake up again. I didn't know I was going to find him. It's just fucking, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's the insanity of like some of these things that when we talk about stuff is and I want to go back to like the thing I was talking about with Lee Ving, the guy from his real name's Lee Caparillo, the guy from Fear. He told me all these stories because he grew up with my father. Like he knew my father in 7th and 8th grade. Like they were friends all the way through high school. And he's telling me all these stories, and it's like, he's like, well, didn't you know your dad was into cars? I'm like, no.
Wow.
Like, no, I didn't fucking know my dad was into cars. Like, and he's like, oh yeah, and I'm like, my dad drove a fucking Chevy Citation. Like, I don't fucking know.
Wait,
like,
Tommy, did your dad know Lee Ving was in Fear? Or was he around for that?
Yeah.
part?
So
Was your dad in New Wave Theater?
No. My dad and Lee shared a common backyard in suburban Philadelphia, and they went to the same swim club. And this is something I found out, and I hope I'm not blowing up links. No, he wouldn't care. Lee was a very, very accomplished diver. He dove for the swim team for a couple different swim clubs, but when he was at Abington High School, he was the only freshman that made the swim team at varsity level when he was a freshman. And he actually had aspirations of going to Yale. And he was one of these guys that this was what he wanted to do. He wanted to be at Yale. So he actually took a year after high school when he graduated and went to a junior college in Massachusetts to get his grades up because his grades weren't high enough to get into Yale. And he was like, I went to this school. I put off everything. I did everything I was supposed to do. Like, I studied hard. I went to practice early. I left practice late. Like, I did the hard work. And he's like, and I applied to Yale and I got denied again. He's like, so it was just devastation. And he's like, I remember sitting out with your father. He's like, we went to go, do some dumb shit, like go play basketball at a park at 2:00 in the morning or something like that. He's like, but we were sitting there talking, and what your father said to me was, so what you really have done is you've given your best, realized that this wasn't for you, and have to figure out what are my next steps. Because giving up and doing whatever the fuck you want, like, whether it's turning to drugs or drinking or whatever it is, like, that can't be it. Like, this can't be the end of your story, so figure out what the fucking next chapter is. And he's like, literally, your father and I, in a park in the middle of Willow Grove, he changed my life. And I'm like,
wow.
Oh, fucking A, man. Like, this is heavy. It's fucking, keep in mind, like, I'm having this conversation with him at my, like, I'm sitting at my dinner table, just like with him on speakerphone, just talking. And like in the middle of it, my daughter walks in and goes, Dad, I need help setting up, that game Sorry?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That game fucking blows.
Yeah.
So fucking bad.
Sorry is boring.
So she goes, I need to help setting up Sorry. And Lee, without skipping a beat, goes, yo, it's time to write that next chapter there, boss. So
yeah,
go do it. And I'm like, fuck, man.
So, in a nutshell, your dad was responsible for fear. The bad.
That's serious cred, dude.
Yeah, it's very funny. Like, when I mention it to other people, they're like, you know how important that dude is? I'm like, yeah, he seems like a really nice guy on the phone. He knows a decent amount of Latin. Like, he sung Ave Maria for me one time entirely in Latin. Like, I don't know. Like,
wait real quick, just because.
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry we're going on so long. You can edit the shit out of this.
No, please go ahead.
Who cares?
Leaving. I'm like sad that his acting career didn't take off further, because I just remember watching movies he was in. He was always like the menacing badass.
Yeah.
Like
villainy. He was the badass in Fame.
Yeah, in Streets on Fire and like all these crazy 80 movies. But just real quick, like growing up in Florida, the cultural void. There was a show that like changed my life forever. More than like records, almost, was the show Night Flight. It was on the USA channel late at night on the weekends, and they would show all these like obscure movies and like obscure music videos and like just real
USA Up All Night. That was the shit.
Yeah. So this was Night Flight's version of USA All Night, which was just cracked me open, changed my life forever. Like everything I know about music and art was like from this specific USA Up All Night Night Flight. But there was a show called New Wave Theater, which this guy Peter Ivers, very interesting guy. Do your research on him. Got murdered, whatever, but he hosted, and like, bands like Dead Kennedys would play, and then Fear played. And like, so, I'm this like kid in my parents' living room late at night, just watching all these alien subversive music and programs, getting my mind absolutely blown, you know?
Yeah.
And the guy interviews Lee Ving, and Lee Ving says this thing. He's like, I know God, and God is gay. Yeah. And you got to understand, this is like, like late 80s, how subversive, like you never heard that coming out of the TV, someone saying God is gay, like it just was like, holy shit, he's going to get in so much trouble. I can't believe, what I mean? Like, can't believe he said that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this, but he was always this like menacing, like subversive guy,
That's
it's so
awesome.
funny to and then hear the story of him going to Yale and being a swimmer or diver, whatever.
Oh yeah. Oh, so he didn't get into Yale. He actually ended up at Villanova, and he went to Villanova for 3 years and was on the diving team there. And he left his junior year, well, after his junior year, to pursue music.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, we're way over time, but
Sorry.
we had to be because that was some excellent on the spot discussion that we just had. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
This is what it's all about.
Yeah. I mean, Tommy,
Yeah.
you gotta start us off next time, man.
Yeah, I should probably start with the, like, what's that old news thing? Like, you bury the lead.
You
Like,
buried the fucking lead, man. Now I'm super bummed. I want to erase everything I talked about my musical history and just start with you, man. And we could have
Man, this is the balance.
Okay.
We like to do music, and we like to get like deep into life shit too.
right.
You know what I mean?
All right.
It's like the yin and the yang.
Right.
Yeah.
man.
Well, guys, congratulations on another day lived.
Absolutely. We did it.
We did it, man.
Yeah.
We did it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks again, Brad, for being on. And to everybody who's listening, like, subscribe, review, comment, share, all that shit. It helps us out. And we want more people to hear this. And who wouldn't want to? I mean, did you hear that? Did you hear what we just talked about? That was
Shit, the last 30 minutes was fucking phenomenal.
Yeah. I'm leaving this all in. I don't give a fuck if it's 3 hours.
And let's really kind of plug the like bring boredom back.
Bring boredom back.
Bring boredom back, man.
The Northeast scene helping bring boredom back since 2019.
Yes.
I like that. That might be a tagline. All right. Thanks everybody for listening, and until next time.